Hello, everyone. We're going to get started. Sorry, a couple of minutes late. Emma, if you want to just kick it off, and then we are ready to go.
Yes, do you want to share your screen, Adil, with everybody?
Oh, good. Yeah, that would be important. Okay, show. Let's see. Making. Can you make me the presenter, or let me make myself the presenter? There you go. And then, can you see it now?
We can't see the presentation.
How about now?
Okay, if you want to just put it in, perfect. Okay, well, hello everybody and welcome to the SafePaaS monthly webinar today, Risk-Free Enterprise Cloud Transformation. Great to see so many of you here today. I'd like to give a very warm welcome to our speaker, SafePaaS CEO Adil Khan. Very warm welcome to you, Adil.
Thank you, Emma, and thanks everybody for joining.
If you do have any questions throughout the presentation, then feel free to send them over. You can just type them into the question section in your panel at the side of the screen. So let's get started. Adil, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Emma, and thanks again, everybody, for joining and your patience for a tardy start. So yeah, just a quick intro on the company. You already know who we are. Main point is stay tuned on more webinars and events. We're out there to spread the word on risk management, especially around ERP systems. Emma will talk a little bit about next events and so forth at the end of the presentation. So today's agenda is, after a quick introduction we just did, is to talk a little bit about the opportunities and challenges in the market. So, okay, that's till introduction. So these are some of the clients, case studies. That's our platform. Most of you are familiar with that platform. So I'll talk specifically how SafePass is helping customers improve their cloud transformation projects. Cloud's been growing, and I'll talk a little bit about the trends and overview of what we're seeing in the market and what our customers are telling us, what their concerns are, challenges are, opportunities are. And then hopefully, that should resonate with what you're seeing in the market and your organizations. And then we'll at the end talk a little bit about how a success story from a customer that we've had some experience over the last several years now working on different engagements. So opportunities and challenges. Basically, let's start with some market data. So IDC and Gartner, and they're all covering this, but IDC is one I picked up because I think this was the slide that represents the user's view, the end user's view. So what I like interesting about this trend, and hopefully you can relate to it, is that there's a demand is from bottom up. So your users are demanding, about 60% of the users, I think the study talks about, demanding cloud. And you can see the shift to SaaS applications as well as what IDC defines as lift and shift to the cloud. And that's a bigger chunk of the market right now. If you think from a business process perspective, which is why I picked this study. So you can see the on-premise is starting to decline, especially in those areas where ERP dominates. So whether you're using Oracle or SAP, which are the big houses, but also, the new entrants like Workday, NetSuite, others. Microsoft is coming in on strong. So any of those cloud vendors are seeing growth in the ERP components, where cloud is becoming more prevalent. And you can see the manufacturing right at the top at 12%, basically moving to a SaaS application with 52% or so doing a lift and shift. And lift and shift, the way that's defined, is basically taking your current applications, let's say an Oracle e-business suite, and putting them in the data center. So a number of our customers have moved with, for example, IBM Cloud. So they're hosting their Oracle infrastructure in an IBM data center. And that's kind of the first move that many customers that are still kind of risk averse are maybe making that move, right? I'll talk a little bit about risks in the cloud in a minute. So, it's sometimes called the hybrid approach. There are a lot of words to define it. But basically what that means is you're taking baby steps to go all the way to cloud. And there's some pros and cons that vary based on your organization objectives and strategy. You can see also just top 3 logistics, enterprise asset management, Planning and forecasting among Oracle customers that I track more closely on a personal level, I see a lot of them moving to planning and forecasting and on and so forth. Now, in terms of challenges, this study was done, really found that helpful by RightScale. And what they're talking about is a little bit of a differentiation between enterprise and SMB. So SMB is typically companies that are below 500 million in revenue in US dollars. And what they're seeing is a kind of a consistent, fairly consistent challenges, right? Just they're more challenging when you're bigger, so it's not earth-shattering information. I mean, I think just the businesses are more complex, they're more multinational, global, etc. So you can see that the challenges start off right at the top with security. Security is the #1 challenge, and it's sort of intuitively, you guys will probably recognize that anyways, right? Because that's where you are going to have folks that are concerned about putting their data in someone else's data center, right? And how can you trust that? And so there are concerns around that. Also, just who has access to your data, because in the old days we had everything tucked away behind our own VPN and our own, routers from Cisco, etc. But now you're relying on someone like Workday or Oracle or SAP to do that for you, right? So do you trust that? Do you have the right level of security within the application and the infrastructure itself, and physical, of course, security around data centers? So there's a lot of concerns primarily around that, and that's what I'll try to address on how you can build better security as you transform to the cloud. The other area, so I'll pick on the top 3 here. There's quite a few things that are like compliance, performance, etc. bottom. But I think the top 3 to think about, managing the cloud spend. So concerns around spending are primarily around, okay, can we predict our usage? You've all heard the stories where you put something on Amazon and the cost is not controlled, and so it's a surprise bill. So you want to be able to control and have a predictable model where you host. So there are, of course, enterprise capabilities available. And then resource and expertise. So not everybody an expert in cloud. We're all learning. We're getting to understand cloud better. There's some frustrations from just the user community that I've heard through my travels, and I'm sure you have similar experiences like visiting user groups and so forth, where there's some chatter about lack of expertise and how can we get done with less resources, and with especially in the U.S. economy being strong and labor market being short, people are struggling to find the expertise to move to cloud. I'd be remiss if I don't talk about governance and control since that's our business. So you can see that that's way up there as well. So generally people are concerned about cloud and controls. Okay, so pretty straightforward, easy to absorb, I hope. So what are the opportunities now that we have discussed the risks? Let's take a look at the flip side. This is a study again by IDC that I liked about the cloud view. It's a couple of years old, but I think it's pretty relevant in the current times. Highlights the improved business agility, right? Ultimately, cloud is about being more responsive, period. Whether it's to your customers, whether to your competitors, new products and innovation, globalization, you name it. Right, cloud enables us to quickly shift and scale based on our business needs. We acquire a company, we get them on cloud. We, want to move on to a new technology, a new platform, a new ITOC, whatever the next big thing is. You will get the cloud vendor deploy the applications for that faster. They're more competitive in the cloud. All the major players have, put their products in the cloud. So agility is probably the #1 reason what our customers tell us, and this backs up with the IDC study, so I picked this, of course. But you can see there's quite a few other benefits to create a business case, right? And most companies, I think the question today from the CIO's perspective is why not cloud? So I think that debate was addressed years ago. There's definitely a movement and multi-billion-dollar cloud presence. So that's definitely not the key concern. The concerns are around, okay, business case is there. We can improve resource utilization, reduce total IT budgets, expand into new markets, as I said, globalization. time to market on new product launches. So all of that stuff is already baked into the business case. What we are talking about today is how do you mitigate those risks when you decide to move to the cloud. So let's talk about those risks. What are they and how do we manage them? And what are some of the transformational risks? So there are general risks that you all will have with any project you take on, and we have solutions for that. Today's presentation, I'm not going to get into that because that's across any new technology, your typical SDLC cycles and controls. So I'll talk specifically to the cloud here. So this is a sample of what happens when you don't control risks in cloud transformation, right? So this is a sample of an internal audit that occurred from a customer that went live with a cloud ERP, and they realized in their 3 major markets where they were operating that they had significant risks identified after the cloud application was successfully launched. And that's something you don't want to see, right? That's what's with the CFOs called the unpleasant surprise, right? That you basically had the ribbon cutting and we got all the promises of the benefits, but then here comes our external auditors, our internal auditors, and they rain on the parade, so to speak, right? They point out problems in business processes that are all significant to financial reporting, operations, etc. And they pick, some major locations where we operate, and in some cases they can't even perform testing because either they don't understand the cloud environment, the controls are not designed yet, or they're ineffective. And those controls, in my experience, have been around access risks, around configuration management and transactions. So that's a concern that comes up from customers that have rushed into the cloud and just haven't kept up with their control environment, because it is significantly different, than your on-premise where you have a staff of resources to maintain the configurations and so forth. In cloud, you have to sort of rethink some of that as you deploy cloud, and where's the responsibility, where's the SOC 1, for example, that that you need to obtain from your cloud vendors, where's the SOC 2 from your data center, GDPR, if that's something important to you for European clients and users. So yeah, so this is the downside, right, that you want to avoid and mitigate. So that's the rest of the presentation. I'm going to address that. So I think from the previous slide, it's pretty clear that it's important to consider controls when you move to the cloud. And if you don't, there's a big risk. But controls also provide an upside. And I want to talk a little bit about how controls can actually help you not only avoid that downside in the end, but also improve your cloud transformation by introducing some new concepts that may not have existed in your offline on-premise type world, where the audits were done offline, right? So there are 2 approaches you can take here, and this is kind of a tried and true approach for SafePaaS. For some of you, this may appear new or different, but basically the approach that we have gathered in the market through our polling our customers, about 250 plus customers around the world and growing, is that you can actually go and implement controls after you go live and before hopefully your auditors sneak in. So what's the right time to get these controls, and you can retrofit them. And you can see if you take the retrofit approach, your initial investment is 0, basically, because you're not buying anything like any tools, or not investing any time in controls. But then it goes up exponentially high because it's a reactive approach, right? It's not a big impact. So what you'll hear for objections on doing this during the cloud project as well, we don't want to distract our teams. Our project teams are busy. We had project timelines to meet on the left. Certainly not buying any technology or bringing any resources during the project. So your upfront cost for controls is almost nothing. So you're not actually thinking about controls, unfortunately, on the left side, and therefore the cost is low throughout the project, in the initial phases of the project, if you will, till you hit, for example, UAT. That's when typically the auditors get engaged. more actively. I mean, they're engaged throughout, hopefully, but more actively start testing, become part of the testing team. Also considerations, just long-term costs are higher due to rework. So think about that if you do want to delay that. And, we're not saying one size fits all here. So there may be valid reasons why you have to delay it. Exposure to risk areas is higher until improvements are activated. So you have higher risks, for example, of user access. So people can get in. And one of the clients I was working with recently, their auditors itself got audited through PCAOB, and they started asking a lot of questions around why suppliers were entered by non-employees. And, they were simply trying to import. So the consulting company was simply trying to help them import suppliers and set things up, but they were not employees that were lending a hand because some of the interfaces weren't working yet. So we had to go and prove out through some example, which I'll share with you in my case study, that why was who approved it and how were they verified, and so a lot of kind of analysis on materialized risk. If those of you that understand that, so that's a big concern with cloud, right? Like things happen quickly. Cloud, there's a lot of pressure because you want to get more done in less time in the cloud. There are fewer resources implementing cloud. These are not 3-year projects. They're 6-month projects, which is where the value is, or shorter projects. And so, on the left, you will see there's a lot of exposure. Requires incremental change that people may not be ready for. Again, just change management issues, and also different ways of running a process. So you may have a one level of approval, but now you want to introduce a second level of approval on journal entries over a certain amount. And so, those kinds of controls may be part of your design, and they may not be available in the cloud platform, or they may have been available in your last platform, and that's how your controls are written up on your on-premise world, because you've had a lot of customizations, let's say, where you could just go in and bring in consultants or developers to build a customization or use any kind of workflow tool to improve that. Now you're sort of dependent on the supplier and their benefits and features and enhancements in their roadmap to get you there. And so the decision and knowledge and all that. So anyways, that's sort of the retrofit approach. The design and approach, which is what, of course, we propose, and a good reason for that is because, when you include that thought in design of a control within your cloud transformation project, you can, pass the audit with so-called flying colors, right? Because you don't have the concerns around control design, right? So you can start with a good control design. Chances are you already have it mapped in your on-premise world. That control design is still the same. So if you have a 3-way match on products and 2-way match on services, that's your control design. It's written up. That's what you've been reporting to audit, and that's how audit has been testing. So we don't want to lose that. We want to make sure that when you implement and configure that cloud application, that control is actually operating effectively into your UAT, user acceptance testing, within the project. I mean, you don't want to go past UAT till you can sign off on that control design. So yes, there will be a few resources or effort involved from your audit folks and your control folks in the beginning of the project, and you can include them to help design the project. We work with all the major Big 4 audit firms, as well as many of the consulting organizations that are helping our customers implement cloud, everything from Accenture to PrimeQ in Australia, Accenture in the US, and several others around the world, like Protiviti in Europe and Middle East, and here in the US. So these companies are basically going in there, helping their clients to make sure those controls are designed in the application. And I'll talk a little bit at the end on how they're leveraging SafePaaS to do that. So they minimize the project team rework, because now that you have designed the control according to the control specification and you have resources on the project that actually understand controls, they're going to be able to, when they will be able to go in and show and provide the evidence for the auditors, and most importantly to the business folks, right? The people that own the controls, that these controls they had on the manual world or the offline world or the on-premise world are still in place. And as a matter of fact, they may even be automated because the cloud offers you that opportunity with tools such as the ones we offer for the cloud. So long-term loss, you can see that's a significant saving, and it's a recurring sustainable saving in that blue curve. You know, you've spent a little bit of time with one of our partners, and you have deployed the control design into the cloud, and as a result of that, you've made those improvements, right? So there may be a little bit of a cost at the front, but you already have a budget for the overall project. It's probably less than 10% of the total cost of your budget for the cloud transformation, which is my just, you know, back of the napkin, what I've seen. And many projects teams are now accustomed to integrated control specialists, right? So they're working with the control specialists, and concerns, you know, around slowing down the implementation are not there because they're leveraging the same workshops where you're discussing the process, where you're discussing the configuration of the system, test plans, and training. So that's just incorporated into your system, and that's how you achieve sustainable benefits from the cloud transformation. Okay, so I took a little bit time longer than I expect on this slide, but I did want to talk through the details so you can use that to create a business case in your organizations and your clients' organizations. So let's talk about the business case, right? How does cloud help you? So by having those controls that I talked in the previous slide, number one benefit you will receive that you can document as a business case is reducing deployment time and cost. And I think I made that case real clear, but just to reemphasize, I mean, because you have these control teams that are designing the controls up front, you know, the time it takes you to deploy that new process on a new cloud ERP system is going to be less, and it's going to ultimately cost you less because you'll have less remediation work, less number of, you know, break fixes around your, let's say, access controls. But also it might help you improve your setups in the ERP application. One of the things our clients like about us is that we can provide them a list of configurations that are available in their on-premise system, compare them against the cloud, and then other instances of cloud as you move up the SDLC cycle. So as you move from dev, test, prod, you can ensure that all those controls that you've signed off actually make it up all the way to go live. And that's what we mean by reducing the time and cost. And I think it's reflected in that previous curve as well. So take a look at your total cost, see, you know, where you have room for the budget to bring in the cloud controls in up front, and then you will be able to reap the benefits as you go to deployment phase because your users are better trained and you're deploying more on time and you're not missing deadlines because quote unquote audit is holding you up, right? The next thing is just errors that happen in an implementation around information and process integrity, right? So you spend a bunch of time configuring the system. Let's say your procure to pay cycle, and suppliers just don't load, or your configuration is not set up correctly. Let's say payment terms are not loaded, which are required prior to loading suppliers, or invoices are failing the load because when you're migrating them, you didn't close certain things. Three-way match is failing, you know, whatever that is. So I'm just picking on a procure to pay cycle here as an example, but it could also be, you know, just the financial results are not, you know, month-end close is not happening because your, you know, your accounts are off and reconciliation is not working. So that's your month-end close nightmare, right? You don't want to be, you want to be in a nirvana, not a nightmare. So to get there, you've got to be able to make sure that all those key configurations, we have thousands of them, right? In any ERP system, including cloud is no different, that all of those items can be addressed and you can improve the process integrity. So those controls that you rely on, and we'll talk about how setups are controls in an ERP system. I'll give you some examples. That those are all in place and signed off by the business, and there's not a you know, inefficiencies of the offline world or the on-premise world that are brought into the cloud, because part of transformation value proposition is to, you know, make that more agile to do business and be more flexible and be more responsive to customers and all of those benefits of the cloud. Oops. Clicked once, twice, many times. So, and then the final one is a no-brainer. Going back to the risks that customers are concerned about in the cloud. So, concerns around compliance and governance. All of those issues can be addressed in the cloud transformation time. So when you do that ribbon, so-called ribbon cutting, the CFO says, yes, we're live and happy that, she or he does not get a unpleasant surprise saying that, well, audit just came through and they rained on our parade, right? So be sure to have the audit in mind, because that's where your financial reporting is going to depend on. Okay, so how do we put these, now that we have made a case for, a transformation risk management, how do you include risk management in this transformation? What are some of the controls that that can help you do that, right? Let's get down to the details, more tactical level. So I've highlighted that those controls that our customers frequently include in their cloud implementations. So they're highlighted in green on my screen. Under Access Pass, they typically will select Policy Monitor, Roles Manager. Policy Monitor will help them make sure that whether you're doing a lift and shift or you're doing a SaaS application, we support all those cases, that you're able to enforce the same policies you had on the premise, right? So if you had a policy that says creating a supplier, paying a supplier by the same person is a policy violation, we want to make sure you get the same protection, or in some cases even better protection, because you may have, as part of your transformation, change the process too, right? Because that's why you're moving to the cloud. So you had credit limits that were done by service managers, now they're done centrally in a shared service center somewhere in Prague or whatever, the kid's situation is. I'm just picking on a recent client I worked with. And so you can now basically apply those same policies even if the process has changed. So when it comes down to governance and compliance, you're still meeting those check boxes and in the same time improving your business. Roles managers to me is more interesting for those of you that are actually in the middle of the cloud, and this is more geared towards the project team and the IT services teams. It's clients buy this all the time for us just for that one module, because what that does is helps you quickly analyze and simulate the risks in the seeded cloud responsibilities and roles. So let's say you have a GL manager entitlement or role which has many privileges, including creating a journal and posting a journal. And let's say those are unacceptable under your policy. So before you even deploy that and assign that in UAT to someone, or even before an SIT or CRP, just depends on your methodology and partner you're working with. We work with, like I said, all the major firms. So we have partners that can use the roles manager to identify risks, such as entering and posting a journal, and then resolve that by removing the privileges from that role within our application and generate a role file that gets then migrated over to the cloud itself. So you've actually, we talked about how people worry that, a cloud transformation project control will just get in the way. This is one way of assuring you that we actually help and not get in the way, because we do this in the SafePaaS environment. Right, this is all on SafePaaS platform. So you're actually leaving the users alone and the implementation team alone to do their process stuff, and you can do this offline and then load these roles when they are ready to see them, and even get them in a workflow approval process instead of chasing them and having a lot of meetings which they don't have time to attend and CRPs and so forth. You can do all the simulation, send them a workflow. It shows them that this role has been, approved from a functional standpoint, as well as has been approved from a policy standpoint, so segregation of duties or GDPR, whatever your policies that your mandate is, right? And then SOD scanner for those of you that just want to run a quick scan, right? So you're late in the project, you just decided that right before UAT you want to do a quick scan, you just don't have a lot of time. So scanner will simply connect with your cloud through web services. We use all the web services supported. For example, in Oracle ERP, it's Cloud ERP, it's the BI services. And we'll run a quick scan and give you a quick report within 24 hours, right? So this is kind of a assurance on you, well, how good are we doing before we go to UATs? I'm working with an oil and gas company in Africa right now that just basically found out about us a little bit later in the sales cycle or in their cloud implementation cycle. And so they just said, look, we are going to UAT. Can you do something for us in 2 weeks? And so we said, yeah, we can come in and run this analysis with our local partner in the region and get you some results. iAccess is user provisioning. So those of you that have closer to go live, you've gone through this investment with cleaning up all the risks within the security model. You want to make sure it stays clean and doesn't kind of change that when we go live. People will say, well, I can't do my job. I need more elevated access to create suppliers. Well, what you really want to do is view suppliers, right? And so there are different ways to guide user base to this new change that is going to hit them, right? We talked about change management a little bit earlier. So iAccess helps you do that. It's a user provisioning tool. It's an ID governance tool. It integrates also into IDM systems through that middle product called fine-grained IDM. So these products will help you prevent risk after you go live, and this will help you remain, compliant with your policies and ensure that number one challenge you have identified, security as the number one risk, right? Access monitoring will provide you certification. Firefighter, again, will help you have elevated access when required. So this is emergency access where you only need that when there's a problem. Configuration monitoring on the right, you can see that. That's a very important tool. I spend more time on that and transaction monitoring and master data and so forth. So these are the tools that you will need during the project to, just like I said earlier, compare different configurations across your offline systems, online systems, etc. And master data, make sure your supplier data all shows up. It's got the right bank account information, tax IDs are populated correctly, etc. And then transactions where you're starting to perform transactions and you want to do a reconciliation or variance analysis on your liabilities in your on-premise system against your cloud system. And then Lifecycle Manager basically does all the documentation and variance analysis around your changes as they come into your UAT and beyond. So that becomes your automated SDLC down here, right? Okay, so how does SafePaaS risk saves you time, risk and time in cloud transformation? So how do we control risk and save you time? These are some of the comments that we have received from our customers, that by providing them pre-built, essentially documentation on setup configurations during and after the ERP deployment really helps them solve that problem where documentation is old as soon as you write it. So that's just a fool's errand, right? You do your setups and you take screenshots and you put them in an Excel file or whatever you do, and the next day somebody changes something because we're still evolving and learning, and that documentation is outdated, right? So it's just not a productive way, and it takes a lot of consulting time and effort and business time and effort away from the benefits. So what we do is automate that through SafePaaS, so you can maintain your configurations in SafePaaS, and you can run it on a click of a button, and it'll generate a report for you right away. So that's a key benefit if you're transforming the cloud. The other items that are important, next item, is the monitoring controls that prevent those unwanted transactional errors. So if you're new to cloud, you've just trained your users, they don't really fully aware of it, so they pop in a journal entry from this is an example where it's not frozen, right? So it's a journal entry that is made through a journal type that was supposed to be for interfaces. Now you have a huge finding from the auditor because you're only supposed to use manual journal entry data, journal sources, right? So these kind of things are happening. So we want to prevent that, right? Because that's what causes that first month close or first quarter close issues, because some of the transactions just get in there that are not, whether you imported, old invoices, unpaid invoices, and you got some paid invoices in there, now you suddenly have overpaid suppliers, or your journal entries are applied incorrectly, or something has come in that's impacting your financial close. So those are just some examples that I've run into in the recent client engagements. The third item is prevent your security risk caused by non-compliant roles. So I think I've covered that already in some level of detail, so I won't dig into it. But you can see that we can help you with Roles Manager rebuild roles in a way that the elevated access that's provided by the ERP supplier is not causing you policy violations. Pre-built content to clean master data, continuously audit transactions and errors. So, before your auditors get in there in UAT, you can run our transaction monitors and give them, a report on what's working, what's under remediation, and so forth. So hopefully their job is easier, and therefore your cost and audit fatigue is lower in a very busy time of your company. Okay, so these are some standard flows that I will leave for you to download. Emma will make this available online. Like all our webinars, you can go to the resource page and download it. So I won't dwell into it. There's quite a bit of information on how we do things, and this is really about cloud transformations. But I did want to share with you, for those of you that haven't seen our capabilities before, that we have all these flows built for the cloud and on-premise customers, and they act seamlessly because we are essentially agnostic when it comes to ERP flows, right? I mean, we're very careful about specific configurations and security setups in each specific ERP, but the flows are best practices, business best practices that are adopted globally with our customers on 5 continents. So you'll set up the security model, which for tier 1 system like Oracle, Workday, NetSuite, etc., Microsoft, it's all there already. So you don't have to do any setups in the first swim lane. You basically start by selecting a certain set of rules that map to your business policies. And if you're already an existing customer of SafePaaS and you're moving to cloud, it's even easier because you basically, as it says, lift and shift, and you just add a new data source. So you create a test environment. You run the analysis, whether it's the SOD or other policy violations will pop up. You'll analyze those, you'll make the corrective action, then you deploy, and eventually this will become monitoring control. So that's policy management approach. Roles management, which as I said, is probably the most valuable tool you'll have during the project, is just being able to simulate those roles, create target roles from source roles, and then being able to simulate, like I said, and generate the setup files that can be then approved, and through our data probe technology can be sent out to the business. And you can prevent ongoing risks. I talked about iAccess. We will take a look at your network files, or your, if you're using one of our partners, OneLogin, that does cloud, unified logins for the cloud. I think we put a press release out there with them. So we work with a number of IDM players as well as your native, player that you have with Active Directory, etc., to allocate employee information from HR, Active Directory information, or IDM information, and then go through registration process, and then users can come in and request approvals up to 5 levels, and based on the level of approval, they can be granted access or denied access, etc., or given conditional access like firefighter ID, which is a conditional access with logging. And then ongoing certification. This is the key control for most organizations. So this can be even done like right when you go live, right? So in UAT, you've got the final list from your business users on who's going to get production set up. When you set up production, a number of our customers will use periodic verification right at that week 1 to make sure that the sustainability phase of the project, where you have this hypercare from your supplier, that all of these implementation folks that were in there providing the hypercare with the elevated access are removed at the end of that hypercare period, as an example. So if you have more questions on how to run this, please feel free to reach out to us, and I can spend more time, and our team can, explaining this process. And then the last workflow I'll share with you is around controlling those configurations and transaction master data around your cloud migration. So being able to download objects from the cloud, which we have metadata for all major tier 1 platforms. And if we don't have something, we'll create at our cost so you can benefit from it. And then it will connect with the data source through whether it's a offline type dump, or it's a online through a tunnel, VPN tunnel or something, will connect to your cloud and download authorized objects that you authorize us to download. And then, or you can do that yourself, and then you'll run them through a snapshot process and basically verify snapshots. So you'll be able to run a snapshot in your your ERP, let's say Oracle e-business suite, and run a snapshot in Oracle ERP, and then compare three-way match on EBS versus Oracle ERP. So that's a unique feature that we're adding or providing to the market that we don't see in the market right now. It's a big pain point, and it slows down the implementation. Same thing with master data and transactions. At the end of the day, you can actually start monitoring these risks. You can turn on monitors in SafePass. So not only will you benefit throughout the project, but it's a sustainable benefit, as we shared in that graph earlier, which means now that you're live, your controls are automatically being monitored in that last swim lane, and you can set up the job frequency for snapshots or tracking based on your control and risks. Okay. So how does that work? I wanted to get into a case study, but just to set that case study up in the next few minutes, basically we have these concepts of doing snapshots throughout the project. I wanted to pick on configurations because that's one of the key areas where we find our partners and customers spend a lot of time, just stuck in the tight implementation. So, you have limited time, get a lot to get done. So we provide snapshots, we provide you ability to do comparisons, we provide tracking changes. So somebody sends up a three-way match, you're rolling out Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa, and then one place somebody changed it back to a two-way match, because and so this whole back and forth can create problems. So comparison and chain tracking is important, and then fine-grained change controls. So examples would be checking across the organization, different business unit, multiple instances, points in time, different ledgers or set of books, versions, operating units. So you can compare and contrast, these items across any of these areas, and you can use the snapshots to document your controls across the entire application, right, or entire organization. So snapshots will help you control your documentation. Comparison will help you compare across all of these comparative units. And then chain tracking will provide you controls in your ERP, in this example in Oracle, to make sure the integrity of controls like the three-way match or approval hierarchy or journal authorization limits, all of that stuff is configured and etched in stone, so to speak, right? And then fine-grained, being able to send out approval requests when the change does occur. So somebody elevates the access level or increases the approval level, that can impact your financial results. So being able to see that is important. And what are some of the examples of these key controls? So application security, chart of accounts, profile options in Oracle, application setups, master data, customer, suppliers, employees, buyers, et cetera. And then key controls that you have in the system are basically managed through these setups, right? So hopefully this brings it home what I'm talking about. So key setups equals key controls. That's the point we're trying to make, that by controlling these key setups in your ERP system using SafePass, you'll be able to leverage these configurations you're doing to ensure that it works in your cloud and on-premise environments. So in the last few minutes, I'm going to hit the case study and take a look at it. So basically, it's a company here in Dallas where I am that I've been working with for the last couple of years, off and on, depending on their audit needs. And basically, they're a big upstream oil company that was basically they do upstream in the sense that they have a great exploration group, and they've recently acquired production groups in Houston as well. And they operate in Africa. They've discovered some large reserves of oil and gas mines. They are publicly traded. So security controls, about 50 rules we ran for them in access rules, from our catalog to identify some early on some security risks around their roles management. Their auditors were one of the big four that they also are, work closely with us, so they were able to share these reports with the auditors, and early on in the project, they were able to address those items and remediate. In their case, there were many of the users that were non-employees. So we built something special for them where they could track, non-employee roles as well as employee roles. And this was an Oracle ERP Cloud implementation that is now successful, and they're running their procure-to-pay cycle through it. Configuration throughout the project, because they had provided the SI part, the system integration partner, elevated access to help them get the invoices in and suppliers in. They wanted to make sure, and then most importantly, their auditors, external auditors, wanted to make sure that they're not changing, areas and processing payments that are not within their authorization, right? So we were able to check that configuration differences across that whole CRP model, and then be able to look at the transactions to identify materialized risk, and also reduce the number of manual controls, which is a great way to move to the cloud with more automated controls. As everything else is getting digitized, I think the controls are, definitely on the top of that list. And so how does it look? So this is now just some screenshots from, of course, I'm not sharing a client data, the generic data, but this is the type of information that they're getting from the cloud. For example, if the journal approval is required, but it's not turned on, they're able to see that and address that across their production, UAT, and so forth. So you can see it becomes part of the testing plan. So this becomes part of a testing solution for them. Also changed by who makes the changes. So once they're in production and they have multiple people making changes, including consultants that are brought in to help them sustain cloud, you can see that we can track changes, time, old value, new value. So that's very helpful. And then finally, changes to set master data, right? Data changes. What was the value after, before, around, in this case, journal sources. So we saw that there's a journal source that's changed. Transaction risk, so you brought in a bunch of invoices from the interface and you have duplicates. So being able to identify those duplicates, invoices easily with similar amount, matching dates and amounts on the invoice. And then, so that's basically what they did. If you have more questions on that, please reach out to us. Emma's got her information here. Emma, are there any questions? I'm going to turn this over to you.
Yes, we've had a few questions come in. Which cloud ERP does SafePaaS support?
Yeah, great question. So we are supporting right now Oracle ERP Cloud. That's the biggest one. We also have Workday live. One of our partners is working with us on Workday. We're working with NetSuite. So those are three that I can just think of. We are as well looking at SAP HANA 4, which has a cloud component. So that's the one that we're working on next. And we hope to have more and stay current with basically all suppliers that are moving their technology to the cloud. So our mission is to stay current with all tier 1 cloud platforms.
Okay, great. Another one, can we compare configurations in multiple ERPs?
Yeah, that's a tricky question because not all ERPs are equal. It just depends where you're coming from. But if you think about it from a process perspective, so if you're looking at let's say procure to pay cycle, right? You'll be able to identify those risks that are in the procure to pay cycle by looking at the same configurations on premise as well as cloud. So that's certainly possible. So we will. The answer is we'll do it where possible. But if you think from a process to process, it's really possible. So there's a little bit of a methodology that our partners know, and we can guide you as well.
Okay, great. And lastly, how can we control risk in cloud ERP?
Oh wow, that's a broad question. So I think I've addressed some of those. It depends on the risk. By controlling security and transactions, and the configurations, and master data, those are to me are the four pillars of controls within the cloud. And frankly, they're not very different than on-premise. Just cloud makes it slightly more uncomfortable, or maybe more uncomfortable, just depending on your view, because you don't have as much access to the infrastructure, right? So you're relying on the supplier to provide a lot of that back end infrastructure, which is a saving. So therefore, you need more layers of evidence to verify that the work the supplier is doing, the cloud provider is doing, is in fact information you can rely on. So even though you're receiving SOC 1s and all that, you still need to independently verify that for your own sake. So yeah, great questions. Any closing comments from you, Emma, before we wrap up? Okay, thank you everybody for a great session today, for joining us. Great questions. We look forward to having you on our next session. Looks like we have, Emma, you've got a few things listed here. So we have Geneva, we're going to be in October at the conference, ISACA National Conference in Europe. We're doing an event in Mexico City in September. We also have a fraud detection prevention webinar coming up. We're excited about that, working with a partner on that. And then looks like we have a webinar with another partner in October with One Login. So looking forward to having you folks on our future sessions. We'll make this presentation available online if you want to share that with your colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you and goodbye, everybody.